Started. It is now 1:40. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance today and those who might be joining us online. No, these are on air. We do have one new member. We will give Dr. Modlin an opportunity to introduce himself in just a moment. And as we often do, we'd like to introduce our guests before we get started, and then we will go through. Good afternoon, Ms. Maccabee. Then we'll get started with the roll call. So for our guests, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves, those in the back as well. Go ahead, we started.
Bob Mendrick. I'm the superintendent of the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio. And Habib is the reason that I'm here today.
We all have that claim at some point or another.
I'm Jen Dodd. I'm the assistant superintendent at the Educational Service Center of Northeast Ohio.
No, unless you'd like to, once again. No, you're good. We have the council president here as well, sir.
Council President Pernell Jones Jr., good to be here.
Councilwoman Turner has joined us previously. Sorry.
Hi, Councilwoman Meredith Turner.
Will Tarter, Fellow at Community Solutions.
Great, thank you.
Peter Hoffman, Professor of CACE Western.
Thank you, Peter. Great, County Executive, good afternoon.
Hi.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind calling to order, or I'm sorry, the roll call.
Sure, I'm going to call the roll right now. Chair Eddie Taylor.
Here.
The Honorable Annette Blackwell. Here. Stephen Cavanis.
Here.
Habiba Grimes.
Here.
Marcia Maccabee.
Here.
Dr. Charles Modlin.
Here.
Levine Ross.
Here.
Yanela Sims.
Here.
And I do have here that Glenn Shoemate and Sheila Wright, Kevin Chalker, Janice Contreras, Colleen Cotter, Dr. Heidi Gillette, Randall McShepard, and India Pierce-Lee are not able to join us today.
Okay, great. The only thing it looks like we may not be able to do today is, unless Glenn does show up, is approval of the prior minutes. We will do so electronically when the time comes. Dr. Modlin, while we're still a step or two away from things, just wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, talk about the work that you were engaged in.
Well, I thank everybody for allowing me to be part of this committee. If I doze off, I've been driving since about 5 this morning to get here. So I wanted to make sure that I got here for this meeting. Thank the county executive for allowing me to be on this committee. So yeah, my name's Dr. Charles Modlin. I'm currently a urologist at Metro Health. I've been at Metro now for about a year. I'm the medical director of the Office of Equity, Inclusion, Diversity. I spent the last 28 years of my career as a kidney transplant surgeon and urologist at Cleveland Clinic, where I innovated a number of health equity programs, and I'm very much dedicated to improving the health of the community. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely, and certainly many of us know your work over the course of time. What are the big to-dos in Metro? Obviously a gem in this town, and soon your new facility will be up and functional, but what are some of the big goals for you in this work at Metro?
So this past April, we actually started our first annual Metro Health Minority Men's Health Fair. The next health fair is going to be Thursday, April the 27th, but I'm also in the process of developing a number of clinical health equity centers within every specialty area of Metro, because as we know, there's health disparities in every area of medicine. So I also have a role in terms of recruiting a more diverse professional staff. I mentor a number of students also.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Modlin. Appreciate you joining. Naila, we'll turn it over to you for a moment of silence and reflection.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. The reflection for today is a little different than I've done in the past. I was thinking of how each day we're bombarded with news of trauma, tragedy, and injustice in our country, our neighborhoods, and our communities. Senseless mass murders at shopping malls and schools, police violence and brutality, the continued spread of pandemics, inequitable and costly health care, once again contaminated water that people can't drink, bathe, or cook, homelessness and substandard housing, racism, ageism, and political extremes that threaten our democracy. Oftentimes we feel helpless, hopeless, and defeated by the injustice and these inequities. Maybe these challenges will always be with us, and maybe as it seems, there's no sustainable change on the horizon. Angela Davis said, and I quote, "I am no longer accepting things I cannot change. I'm changing things I cannot accept." And like Angela Davis, CACE has made a conscious choice not to accept things we cannot change. With the strength of the members at this table, we made a conscious choice to remain focused and to confront the issues with reasonable, practical and implementable solutions. Our conviction to do will make a difference, and I trust, just as Sam Cooke sang, a change is going to come. We can take a moment.
Thank you all. And as I want to do, I'll ask if there's any comment on the reflection. There's a whole lot going on in the world today, and as Naila indicated, maybe it'll always be this way, right? We endeavor to try to make the changes, adjustments, and influence in the ways that we can, but some of these arguments, all of these arguments have persisted. All of these issues in one form or another have persisted. Any thoughts or comments or anything you want to add to the agenda before we go forward?
Public knowledge that there's a police involved shooting in Maple Heights. Right in Maple Heights, in Cleveland. I'm grateful for the graciousness of the Cleveland mayor, Justin. He reached out to me soon after. Officer that, of course, is on administrative leave. Protesters at City Hall. Balance. The leadership starts looking like the majority of the population, the challenge that we have. As a mother of two black sons and black grandsons, it's a difficult balance. I understand the officers, they want to go home. And this happens to be a black officer. However, the majority of my police department does not look like me. So it's a balance that is very difficult for, I think, people. There's an expectation of what I should be doing or what I should be thinking. There's political fallout, of course. The decision I make is, as I look at this officer's file and decide, back to work, versus looking for the story. I have the story of the officer who has two little kids and a wife that are terrified because they've been threatened. So as we talk and we talk about what happens on the young the police answer, there's another side of the story, and then there's a person that has to really make this right. So I certainly ask, as we consider these issues, think about the persons in leadership. They have to make decisions. Give us the wisdom, give us the support, give us the grace, as the word I just shared with them. Help us do the best we can as we are in positions we've not been in before. Looking for us to have the right answer. I can assure that I will make the best answer for this situation. Thank you for both sides.
Serenity is due to us all, so thank you for offering those comments, and grace we certainly will extend as well. Any other thoughts or comments? Anything else we want to add to the agenda for today? Okay, well, thank you, Naila. Any public comments?
So since our last meeting, we have not received any public comments via email to our equity email address. And today's in-person meeting is open to the public, as we all know. And I don't believe we've received any public comment today. I'm getting the no that we have not. So we can move on with your permission, Chair.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think the public comment of this will ramp up after we begin again the recording. We've got a few other things we're going to do from a community standpoint. We'll talk about how we're going to get there some point throughout this discussion today. But we do want to hear from the public, right? One way or another, good or bad, we want to hear from the public. So we now have to invite the public back into these conversations after a bit of a lull that we all understand. So we will get there. Message from the county executive, sir.
Thank you. I'll keep it relatively short. I wanted to let people know that we are beginning through our Department of Senior and Adult Services a new initiative. It's called the Livable Cuyahoga, a community for all ages. We're joining the Age-Friendly Cities Project, which is being sponsored and hosted by AARP. And the goal is to enhance the 8 domains that the project highlights. They look to improve for older Americans, outdoor spaces and buildings, transportation, communication and information, civic participation, employment, respect and social inclusion, health services and community supports, social participation, and housing. And we have projects going already on a number of those subjects. Some of you who work with the county know about our DSAS program, Department of Senior and Adult Services, our Adult Protective Services, so that if somebody is suspected of being subject to some kind of abuse or neglect, we investigate that and can take steps to try to fix it if it's found that that exists. We have some special programs in our Consumer Affairs Department. They've created a game based on bingo. They call it Scammo, which they go around to senior centers and basically educate seniors about the current scams that are oriented towards seniors, and sadly there are a lot of those that come up every year. The housing is a big issue, which we've talked about here before, and we, working with County Council, thank you, Council President, have several projects that are beginning to move forward. An affordable housing project, I think there's one that's actually on the agenda tonight or tomorrow night. We have a project for home repairs to make them more accessible and inexpensive. We have several projects that deal with homelessness. So without getting into too much of the detail, the fact is that we want to be a place that's that people can age here in place and age at home. Our Options for Living program is oriented that way. They provide, where necessary, home health care, home aids. They can send people in to help with home adaptations, whether that be grab bars or ramps or other things that make it possible for somebody to stay home longer. We don't want people being forced into institutions to live out their days. We want people to be able to live at home in their communities, in their neighborhoods. So we're doing what we can to help with that. This will further focus our efforts.
Any questions of the county executive, these issues around sort of the twilight of folks, professional and just their lives is important. So it's great that this work is being done. So dignity is a part of the equation. So continue good work there, no question. Any other comments or questions of the county executive?
Is this going to be linked into Viasano, Metro Health's initiative?
Well, Metro has been a great partner. I don't know the answer to that, but I know that we've partnered with Metro on so many things, and we welcome further involvement if you're over there. Help, we would love to see more. When the COVID crisis was at its peak, and we were involved in testing and tracing, the hospitals got very involved for their patients. But in general, there were a big group of people, primarily minorities, that were not being served. So our Board of Health and the county and Metro got together and partnered and made sure that we had tracing and testing accessible in the minority communities. Partnered with some of the churches, for example. And then when the vaccines came out, again, we partnered with Metro to actually send people around. Metro staffed some of the places in the community, like the Salvation Army and others, to make sure that we were serving all the community. So Metro's been a tremendous partner.
Please.
Hi, Mr. Executive. How are you today?
Good, how are you, Marcia?
I'm good, thank you. One of the things is with respect to keeping seniors at home and in place, particularly in those places where there are senior living facilities, is the safety and security issues. So as this program, we understand about people staying in their homes that they own and that kind of thing, but what about those that live in, these high-rise apartments and those kinds of things? We find often, at my church, I get reported a lot of issues with safety and security.
I would suggest that when you have the opportunity, you can suggest to people they can call the Department of Senior and Adult Services here at the county if people are, having problems that they need help. The DCS group wants to be helpful. So that's something I would recommend. I'm seeing if I have a phone number here directly in something. I may have. But if not, I'll get you the phone number.
Thank you.
Mayor Blackwell.
I would just add, as you know, you guys have been out to our senior center. There was a scam going on at the time, about social security numbers. We were able to really heard that for about 30 seniors that were fighting. As you know, you were there, and thank you for being there for the groundbreaking of the new senior housing development.
Some of you haven't seen it, by the way. I'll take the, I hope I'm not out of my lane, but I'm sure the mayor would love for you to come out and take a look at it. It is really it's gonna make a big difference. And those sorts of things are what we have to do in this community. So thank you for what you're doing.
Just in concert with we've got to make sure that we get into these where they are living, these older adults. Not reaching them. We do have one already, and this is the ambulatory one, not coming to the senior center. Where all the services you guys do present, we're able to capture them in a controlled environment, but those living independently, they're missing out on perhaps all of these services. So there's a way, I'll continue to engage my director to access those, to make sure we're not leaving them behind, because safety and security for them, they just can't. This is an more affordable way to live than trying to maintain the homes with the values going up for property tax and all of those issues that are surrounding seniors and making a decision whether to stay in their more affordable. An equity standpoint, in this position with healthcare professionals here, I think that's something we need to get closer to make sure they're getting those services and they're aware and addressing the safety and security.
And I would add to Marcia's
Just gonna turn to you.
question about the digital divide. We are now providing services, a company that will help, that will literally come to your church, and they will help the seniors to have access. They'll help them with the computers, with training for the computers, and just help them be better connected within their own church and just to the world in general. So that's a relatively new that we have worked together to provide funding for. So it's definitely something to add to the mix of the services for our seniors.
And I was gonna turn to Purnell, to Council President Jones, also to note that the two of us have been out to several community new developments for much more affordable living for seniors and others. This is all gonna make a difference. And these were located in minority areas, which is extremely important.
And we did, Armin and I and Mayor, it was a great opportunity to celebrate I'm going to say the access to capital that was given in that moment. But also, I tried to lightly touch on the fact that every resident should have an expectation of having access to capital within their own community. they're depositing in the banks, then they should be receiving that money back in the form of a loan. I think I used the illustration of blood operating like money. The way it circulates in the body, it strengthens the body. So does money when it is lent back to its depositors. And when it's not being lent back in the form of access to capital, as that moment we were celebrating, then the body weakens. Okay, and we can't have that. We need our financial institutions to stand up to the obligations, step up to the obligations that from the Congressional Reinvestment Act of the late 70s. They are to provide access to capital, lend money back to the depositors of their banks, and that's what will keep our community strong when they're receiving home loans, when they're receiving loans for small businesses, when that type of developer, which was a great project, but we should all consider ourselves little developers, getting a home, a small business, whatever it might be. Everyone deserves that access to capital.
You should know that the council president has been consistent in that theme, right? This notion of circulation or recirculation has been important on a number of different subjects, and in time, if we do that the right way, there's a multiplier that occurs if we are as diligent and adamant about this as we should be. So thank you for that. And I should also say this is important work. This body has always elevated and propped up all the good news that's been talked about from the county, and certainly from the county executive, and some of the initiatives, whether it's the results of the disparity study and the work done, and then the executive orders, the creation of a department that's was made possible because of these things. But we also know that there are current headlines. I want to be professional, so this is not a confrontation. Any response to the current headlines around the county, whether it's on the issue of children or the issue of some of these more recent ARPA discussions. Again, we understand that no comment may be necessary because there's work in process, but just thought we'd give you an opportunity to respond if you desire.
I'll start with the ARPA. Okay, this council, and in fact, Armin and I, we met and we discussed a framework for the monies, and one which was unique, but well within our right to do, was to carve $66 million, the 11 council members and roughly 6 per council, to provide monies to our communities to address the COVID, the issues caused by COVID. I'm seeing myself on camera now.
You got it now.
Lord, just let me sit here. Somebody should say something. I was like, don't worry, don't worry. But $66 million, $66 million. And we set up a framework of how we should do it. And we decided we would talk with our mayors. They know the needs in their community. They know the needs. And with that, we received project applications from them. And they're incredible projects. They're all in the papers. As negative as the article was, I was happy to see them list the things that we were doing for the community. The road work, the projects in Maple Heights. Our mayor is excited. Every mayor is excited because they know what they need, and we were able to partner, vet every project. It goes through our full council, but the plain dealer just didn't like it. There's a traditional way of our county executive, moving the monies, but the council has that legislative power. We control the purse. So with that, we did what we needed to do in a one-time moment, using these $200+ million of government dollars for a one-time moment to make sure we penetrated the community as effectively and efficiently as we could with these dollars. And I'm proud of every project that not only I, but Councilwoman Meredith Turner brought forward, and all 11 of my colleagues. But the paper does not agree with it. So they have used illegal terms like slush fund. That's an illegal term. People should go to jail for slush funds. And our prosecutor has clearly said what we have done is within our legal right to do. So I have continued with my colleagues to press forward and make sure that our cities receive these dollars in the most effective way that we can, regardless of what the paper has to say. So there have truths, some misconceptions, but they authenticate and validate everything when they write it in the paper. So we will continue to do what we're doing. I don't know if there's a specific question, but I am proud of every project, and nothing's off the record. I've written editorials, and they have printed them. I have more coming, but we will continue to do what I believe is at least what they've elected me to do to the best of my ability.
A handful of mayors that I've talked to on the subject, and even tomorrow I'll be at the Mayors and Managers Association meeting. They've all said the same thing, all above board, all about process, and the daylight that should be given to this whole effort has been provided. So they are grateful, I believe. Not everyone got what they wanted. We get that. That's just the way it works. But no one has questioned the approach, the authority, and the good thinking that's gone into this in advance. So I'm with you on that one.
Okay.
Any comment from you, County Executive?
Talk about the other one. First, I just want to, support my council president. The fact is that, when you look up the word slush fund in the dictionary, you'll see it talks about bribes and it talks about illegal efforts. And there is nobody on council that's gotten a penny out of any of this. It's not bribes. It's not, so the newspaper's supposed to know that words make a difference. And unfortunately, well, if that's the plain dealer, then.
No, that's my assistant. She bothered me. Sorry about that.
But the use of words is important.
That could have been worse timing. Go ahead.
Let me mention, you raised the other issue about the kids, and that is so important. It's the county has the final place where kids can go. Have to go sometimes when nobody else can take them or wants to take them. If the parents won't take the kids, either because they can't handle them or if there are plenty of good nonprofit organizations in towns, sometimes they can't take the kids or won't take the kids. There's the juvenile detention center, juvenile court. They're packed with kids who have done violent crimes. So kids who just have no place to go, they won't take. So, so what happens is people drop them off at our office building, the J. Ned Hunter office building. And we don't have the authority to do anything other than to try to place them. So, there have been, again, the Plain Dealer has written stories about how sometimes bad things happen when kids come to the building and then leave. We can't tie them down. We can't lock them up in our office building. If they want to leave, they're allowed to leave. That's also an opinion from the county prosecutor. And in fact, he went further and said that if we try to stop them, we could be committing crimes. So so sometimes bad things happen, and that's tragic. But we have developed a plan, which, to their credit, I think the Plain Dealer did mention somewhat recently. Again, with council's great support, we have had, and this is not a county problem. This is not a state problem. This is a national problem with trying to find placements for youth that are troubled. And I'm sure Dr. Modlin can second that. I mean, it's the hospitals see it. Every nonprofit sees it. It's a real serious problem. And the state of Ohio has come up here and they've said to us, we're ahead of the curve and they'd like to work with us because they have problems all over the state. So what we're doing is, it's a multiple part. First, in order to try to do better at protecting the kids that are there and protect the staff that have to work there, we've assigned a deputy 24/7 to the J. Ned Hunter building. Second, because it's so difficult for staff, we're proceeding with a significant pay increase. It's hard to get people in almost any business these days to come to work, and especially if it's a job like this. So we're giving us a substantial pay increase, and hopefully that will help. But most important, it's important to note that, and the Plain Dealer has overlooked this, that some 90% of the kids that get dropped off at our building, our staff is able to place them quickly, within hours. And so they don't stay overnight, and they don't stay for any period of time in the office building. It tends to be the older kids who are troubled, and significantly troubled, some of whom have been to the juvenile court and, as I said, can't stay there. So they come back to us. So, there are kids that are very difficult to place, and apparently these organizations out there, the residential providers, know who these kids are actually, and because they're out there all the time, and we've had terrible problem getting them placed. Sometimes we have to place them in southern Ohio. Sometimes we have to place them outside of Ohio. We'll place them anywhere we can get a placement, because they should not be living in an office building. But it's a serious problem. So what we're doing, we've put out another ask for bids. We've been working on this literally for several years. We've brought in all the providers. We've talked to them. We've urged them. We've argued with them to take our kids. And now we've gotten one bid in the most recent RFP we put out from the Christian Home, which is partnering with the Centers for Families and Children, and they have agreed to take our kids with no eject or reject. Part of the problem is we've had places that have said, well, I'll take your kids, and then they won't take them when they see who it is, or they won't keep them because they're too difficult to manage. Now, I don't know what's going to happen at the Christian Home. I hope it works, but they've at least agreed, and we're going to be having the contract. I think it comes before council pretty soon. No, I think we signed it already.
It'll be on the next council agenda.
Yeah,
2
okay.
weeks, 28.
Where they've agreed to take them with no eject or reject, and I think that's going to make a huge difference. We also have a backup plan now. That's our first effort. The backup plan is we will create our own youth diversion program, as we've done with the seniors, not seniors, but with adults, to keep them out of the criminal justice system. We're going to be looking at what it will take to create, to take the Metzenbaum Center, which we own, and remodel it into a youth center where we could put problem kids into it for a period of days if there's no place else to place them. We hope to not have to go there. We hope the centers and the Christian Home can handle this, and we're looking forward to that.
It's
Very
Long
well.
answer to your question.
No, but an important answer, please, Councilwoman.
If I could, just want to backtrack for a second on the ARPA issue, and wanted to let my president know that he's doing an amazing job, and thank you for your partnership with the executive on this issue. I remember, and journalists, they have an amazingly vital role in our society. They do. As you know, I've only been here since November, so coming into these ARPA dollars was, really exciting for me. I still haven't really observed the normal way that council does business before we had these ARPA dollars. I have met with all of my mayors. That was the first thing I did when I became a member of this council. Is I met with all the mayors in my district, and they immediately began telling me of all the needs that they had and what they wanted me to do with this money. So I don't feel like I had any secret negotiations, or, it was all above board, and I basically delivered on what they asked me to in those initial meetings. And then I doubled back around. And so, needless to say, many of those requests are moving forward, and I also believe that they're really vital and beneficial to the communities. The other thing that I wanted to say is I still have some of my ARPA money left. And the reason that I've been coming to these meetings with this body is to get some feedback from the work and the research that you all have been doing on a way that I can utilize the rest of those funds to address the mission of this body. So I hope that you would be a willing partner with me in that space. And I wanted to offer this card to Ms. Montgomery. It is basically a quick resource director guide, executive, and that number that you was looking for.
Oh, good, thank you.
For your
church members. Everything that you want to know about the county is on here. I have some more back here. And I have 10 communities in my district. $6 million didn't go pretty far. So I think the council as a whole, it's a good faith effort to really try to meet some of the most pressing needs in our community. And unfortunately, everyone won't be able to benefit from those dollars. But I think we're doing the best that we can. And I remember telling the plain dealer in my editorial interview, remember when we got that high-speed rail money from the federal government and then they decided to give it back? So we're not giving this back. We're going to do something amazing with this money. So that's what we're doing.
Thank you, Councilwoman Turner. And
I should add to that, if you don't mind.
yeah, go ahead.
Because, she's reminded me, the plain dealer has talked about the money as being developed, plans in secret and with no public input. And, I want to remind people, we were public about this money. We talked a lot about the money that's out there. We talked about the things that could be done with it. We went out, we did community meetings, and we put up a website. And we got hundreds of suggestions on the community website as to what to do with the ARPA money. That website was open to the council. They participated in that. So, there was nothing being done secretly. And, I brought together a group of community leaders to help develop plans that would be transformative for the county. So most of the money is going to things that don't benefit any particular community, but some amount is because they get overlooked in most things. So, that's my little aggravation over what's in the newspaper.
And look,
While
we
we're
know
venting-
please.
I would say, while we're venting, I might as well lay mine out as well. The last thing, we did not violate a single sunshine law. Everything we did was above board, although they kept talking about secret, and you hear those echoes coming, secret, meaning that it just took me back 10 years ago, if you all remember the county amount. I'm newly in office, and they put my and my colleagues' picture on the front page of the plain deal that we had a secret meeting. My goodness, I'm a founding member of that Secret Six. But we were doing the work that we're supposed to do, and that's what we're doing right now. And we will continue to do it.
The outcome that's best is if the communities that are intended to be served are served, and the folks who need it the most get the most assistance. So that's the outcome we're all after. Process we get, we understand, we appreciate it. We know that you've done that the right way, but in the end, we're judging this by the benefit created and the good that results from it. So that's where we are.
How do we communicate that?
Thank you for that question.
Because I've got a significant amount, I have to come down Thursday. I have to really verify what I'm asking and explain what we're, so how do we?
One of the things we're going to do, and Ms. Grimes and others will have some responsibility for this, we'll talk about funding that CACE has to communicate, to assemble, and we're going to talk amongst ourselves to figure that out from a reporting standpoint, good and bad, right? The things that are working and not working, but we have a duty and obligation to the community to talk about these things, and that's where we'll go with some of the funds that we have from operating, not from ARPA, from operating to do this work.
Can I add a few more good government points now to what our county executive shared around the children? Again, you mentioned 90% of them are being placed. It is the older population. And hurt people. They're abused and neglected children, and we have that challenge of dealing with them. If you go back 15 plus years ago, we had the Catholic Church had Parmadale. So all these challenging children went to Parmadale. And as difficult as it was, they gave an excellent service to us. They in time left the industry, and they left. And when they did, there was nothing that replaced Parmadale. We wanted all of these different organizations and institutions to take these children, and no one would. And they ended there in an office building. And we now have to come up with a way to address it. This was a problem that I learned over time, over 10 years, what's happening. I've been in the building, in Jane Edna Hunter building. I've met with the social workers and the challenges that they have. And we do have a solution, and we're certainly going to watch it and make sure it's as effective. Christian Home will step into that void and look to meet the needs of these children. But we'll continue to watch that as well. The state, as the executive said, the state has said they'll be a partner. So some of the issues the executive mentioned, that we can't touch the children, we can't do this, those are all shackling us from being as effective as we can. So we need to advocate to the state, say, if you want us to be a partner, if you come in after reading the newspaper and saw all the negative things you heard in the paper, they came into town and said, oh, it's not as bad as the other 87 counties in the state of Ohio. In fact, you are kind of a leader of, as bad as it was in the paper, you're not as bad as the rest of the state. We want to partner with you because we think if you get the solutions, they can be replicated in other places. So that means we need to advocate not simply for money, but change in policy that will allow us to be effective. So as we work with Christian Home, we'll say, what do you need, Christian Home? What will help you be more effective? What legislative changes can we advocate for to make so that we can create the model that can be replicated, not just across the county, but across the nation? As the executive said, it is a national problem. It's just focused on us at the moment. So our work is ahead of us in these coming months and years, but that's where we're moving towards.
Thank you for reminding us again that it's a 100% problem because kids are affected, but a 10% problem really in terms of those that we are having a difficulty around. And if we can solve that and even make what we do for the other 90% stronger and better, that's, again, a great outcome. We're going to move on, but thank you, Councilwoman Turner, for providing that information to Member Maccabee. I think the document may have had a reporting hotline on it as well. Cuyahoga County Department of Senior Adult Services is a reporting hotline, which is 216-420-6700, 216-420-6700 for anyone who might listen to the recording or watching us live or might want. So we will move on. I'm going to hold some of my additional comments till we get to certain parts of the agenda. I would ask, though, that Member Cavanis and Member Grimes join me in talking about the conversation we had last Friday with the county's commission. So we are a counterpart organization, if you will. We have our council, which is for and about the citizens and reporting to that group. Council has its internal, the county has its internal group, the commission, and we met with a few members. Steve, why don't you start and tell us what we heard as a combined discussion.
I guess, the first thing I'll say is, we've been around and working for 2 years on this.
2 plus.
And I think this was the first time we convened the group. There's been a lot of work that's been done, I would say. I think that even with some transition on the commission's end and even on our end, everyone continues to, pour their heart into this work. I would say that, there was, brief discussion about, the next administration and what that could look like in terms of moving bodies around. But ultimately, again, everyone is sort of rowing in the same direction. And, I think from what I heard, as long as all of this is well documented and whatnot, this work will still be intact as we move forward. As it relates to, economic development, I continue to work with Director Lockett on some efforts, Director Herdig as well. So all positive. We're starting to develop a cadence, and I think a much needed cadence as it relates to, hopefully, how I see it, us actually being an advisory. So the commission coming to us, asking us for advice based on the lens that we look through. And I think it could be reciprocal as well. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Anything to add?
Yes, I echo what Stephen has said in terms of this ability to share space and have clarity that we are all rowing in the same direction, and that there is a culture being built inside county government that can sustain the work that the CACE has contributed to. I think there is exemplary work happening in Director Lockett's office at the Department of Equity and Inclusion that could be a model for other municipalities and public systems, including entities that are publicly funded. And so I'm excited by that and just want to offer kudos to you in that effort. I also want to lift up the challenges of turnover and workforce volatility that came through in that conversation, particularly impacting the Department of Health and Human Services. There's been a lot of transition, a lot of change, and in the midst of a health crisis in COVID-19, in the midst of a social and health crisis, in the increasing behavioral health needs and mental health needs of young people, it's not a great time to see that happening, but we know that that's happening across sectors. What I hope and what came through in that conversation is that the CACE and Commission can hopefully establish a pattern of communication where we as CACE members can be kept informed and abreast of what is happening within departments and part of sharing out messages that the community might need to know, but also to share some thoughts and ideas that are occurring for us, because this is not a static situation. It's a very dynamic environment. And so as we are going through our daily business in service to the community, we may all have some thoughts that emerge. I can't help but respond to the issue of the kids and these young people who've been residing at Jane Edna Hunter. That was a significant concern of David Merriman, and it is not a new situation, as County Executive Bush has pointed out. I will say these kind of colliding conditions that are creating these circumstances for young people have a root cause, have maybe multiple root causes, and I hope that as we are looking to stabilize our care for these young people, that we recognize that there is a thread of commonality that exists for these young people, including trauma and adversity, that have origins in structural and systemic racism, that have origins in the continued conditions of poverty for children in our community, caregivers, including elders, seniors who are trying to care for young people but don't have the resources and supports that they need, so that hopefully folks aren't feeling like they need to drop their children off at the administrative offices, so that hopefully the schools are not out of ideas and calling county perhaps to seek support. We've worked closely with my organization, PEP, to partner with the Family Children's First Council. Cuyahoga County has an excellent kind of infrastructure. I think it's underutilized. I think the collaboration and partnership is not maximal. And so while we get to this point, I think it's important that the community know that we are at this point. We've been building to this point for quite some time. So my hope as a member of this council and as the leader of an organization and as a resident of Cuyahoga County is to be supportive in addressing those upstream issues and root causes for the conditions that lead children to land in the Jane Edna Hunter building, sleeping there for several nights. And I invite other members of this body to join us in thinking through what might we do that can disrupt these patterns. They are decades and generations long.
Thank you. Thank you both. Any questions from other CACE members around the CACE, the externally focused part of this work, and the conversation with Commission, the internally focused, in large part, the internally focused part of this work?
Okay, Chair Taylor, I don't have a question, but I would like to offer a comment, if I may. So, as many of you know, I'm co-leading the work along with Helen Forbes Fields at the City of Cleveland. And I think we, along with what Cuyahoga County is doing, is now a leader in a lot of the research that we've done around the country. A lot of resolutions were passed, a lot of declarations were made, and not in many places are actions following to make things happen behind that. I think we're at a very unique place. You and I, Chair, have talked about, I think it's going to be a really good time to really talk about what kind of additional collaboration can happen across the city and the county. The city is at a place now where we too have an internal structure that's happening at the city level, led by the Commissioner of Health and Social Justice and Equity. And they set their system up the same way that our external system is set up, so that there's a lot of parallel kinds of work going on. And so we have, I think, over the next 7 to 9 months, a lot of activity that will happen with solutions being put together. We have a strong, while our meetings are not public, we have a strong community engagement plan that is being evolved in order to engage the community in the process. So I look forward to us exploring how, more closely we can work.
Time is
together.
due for that to
Yes, sir.
begin the planning for that discussion, so absolutely.
Okay.
We'll work together. Thank you for that update as well on the work that's happening within the city. Please.
I just want to echo what was said and what Ms. Grimes has said. The issue is upstream. The systemic racism, that power that has pushed back our community and hindered our capacity to move forward. We're here to address when the executive and we, as the legislative branch, brought this committee together. There certainly is a universe of again, issues. Systemic racism is at the root of, but our world is here in the county. What can we do? What the things that we can red light and green light? That is where we can have the most impact in the solutions that come out of this body to help us. Some of my thoughts have been over the last 10 years, how do we bring good schools to our community? How do we bring good housing stock? How do we bring strong local businesses and the work capacity of our residents to take advantage of these opportunities? What is upstream? Where is that point where that intersection of sometimes racism and classism can occur? And how do we create an environment for everyone to be successful? I heard, Eddie, as you mentioned, the racial disparity study. That's certainly one where are we following those 12 action items? If the needle is going to move, we have to make sure we're doing them. Have we looked at those and said, have you been pushing the needle? Because every 4 years, when I wrote that legislation, I said every 4 years we will do a disparity study. So we will know the health and temperature of our community through that study. And so for me, that's one point of contact of how we give out contracts in the to those in this community, of which we want the African American community to have their fair share. I see the packet talks about education. Marsha and I have worked very diligently in the context of education. We have a Closing the Achievement Gap initiative, where we're in local high schools in many cities around this county. Maple Heights was one for many years, where we simply engage the youth. And that in 9th grade, starting with 9th, that was a dropout year, okay? And make sure that they stay from 9th through 12th on the path of constructive opportunity and not fall off into these destructive activities. And by simply placing a mentor in that high school, we've been able to do that, taking them to black colleges, historical colleges, light tutoring, all those things. And we did that, targeting the at-risk youth. And because they were at risk, I learned that some of them had failed earlier grades, maybe the 3rd grade or the 8th grade. So as we followed them through 4 years of education with the intention of giving out proclamations and acknowledging them in 4 years, we had a graduation class after 3 years. Why? Because some of those at-risk had failed in earlier grade, and when we engaged them, we helped them recover their proper school credit, and then they graduated on time after 3 years. To me, that was an upstream point of contact where we were keeping children in. The professionals say start with the 3rd grade. Start there and make sure you'll shoot them on a trajectory. Well, by the time the 3rd grade gets to the precipice, they were falling off the edge. So I said, no, let's start with 9th through 12th and make sure those that are at the precipice don't fall off. And we'll work our way back to the 3rd grade and build the necessary infrastructure and mentors as possible, replicating what we have. But let's go to the point of contact upstream where the issue is and where we're seeing our children fail and not have necessary advantage. So that I'm sharing with you things in the county that we're already doing that could be better, and that's at least you'll know where we are. Education, jobs, access to capital. We talked about that already. If we deposit your money with local banks, and if we're depositing, then we can use our leverage to make stronger partners with our banks that they provide access to capital. So those are conversations that could be had around what we're doing. What are we doing, and how can we be more effective? How do you press us as council to do these things? The executive office, those are the things that need to be done, and those are just a few things to
Great.
think about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So I want to thank Stephen and Habiba for taking the initiative and going to meet with the internal group. I think that was overdue and a great move, and I hope those continue. And Habiba, you were talking about, what are the causes, the roots, and we've been trying to focus on those. Education is key, for example. The county generally doesn't do education. K-12 education is the school districts. But we recognized how important that is in everything else we're trying to do, so we did get involved. We, started, we have a pre-K program that is designed to give kids and is highly focused on minority kids a great start in life at age 3 and 4, so that they're prepared to move ahead. We've doubled the number of kids in pre-K, and high quality pre-K. When the city of Cleveland put in their Say Yes program, it's primarily a scholarship program, but it recognizes that in order for kids to get to a point where they can use a scholarship, they need supports in school. They need, all the social services and their families need support. So we're there to provide those supports, and that has made a difference. And I have to give kudos to the council president. Also, I'm going to need his help on a lot of things, so I got to kiss him a little bit. But he has been the advocate for the closing the achievement gap program, which, as he described, has really done some great things for young kids. And he's the one that's out there, every day, certainly every budget, pushing for more support for closing the achievement gap. So he's the guy.
Great. So we have 55 minutes to go, and we're a quarter of the way through the agenda. I will speed things along. Let me though ask your help in naming the internal members of the commission. We've got
Sure.
Director, please go ahead.
There's Lenore Lockett as the director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. There is Paul Herdick, who is the Department of Development Director. There is Brandy Carney, who is the Director of Justice Services. There's David Merriman, who's the Director of Health and Human Services. And there's Sheba Marshall, who is the Interim Chief of HR. And those folks are the 5 named members in the legislation. It can only be those 5. Armin had asked me to serve, but we looked at the legislation and realized I could not do that as well. Those 5 people can also obviously
She also volunteered, but she volunteers for everything. So.
Those people can also have their designees come, and do we do have their designees come?
Yep. So full picture for everyone. Jennifer, Bob, are you guys ready?
Sure.
Okay.
So, hi, everyone. Thank you for allowing us to be here. Habiba, thank you for inviting us. This is really fascinating. I know almost nothing about your organization, CACE, and I'm guessing you don't know much about the Educational Service Center as well. We try to stay under the radar screen and just do good work. So I'm going to give you a little synopsis of what we do. 50 years ago, I would have been the county superintendent that was really responsible for the education of children throughout the county. That has evolved into strictly being a service organization for all the county schools. So we are aligned with every school system in Cuyahoga County, and that's even evolved now to districts that have aligned with us by choice. They're allowed to do that from Geauga, Summit, Lake, and Portage County. So we have 48 school systems that align with us, and we provide services for all of them. We are somewhat funded by the state, but we do good work, and sometimes we get a fee for that work, but we're primarily just out there doing good work for districts. let me give you a little bit of some of the other things that we do. We are a fiscal agent for groups like PEP, the Positive Education Program. Also, Bright Beginnings, which used to be Help Me Grow. We also operate Pre for CLE. We're the fiscal agent for Pre for CLE, the great preschool program for Cleveland City Schools. We provide professional development throughout the county and actually the state. And now that we're Zooming professional development for lots of places, we even had somebody from Brazil actually get onto one of our Zooming professional developments. Pretty amazing. We run the First Ring Schools Collaborative. These are all the school systems that are connected to Cleveland, contiguous to Cleveland. I'm the co-chair of the FCFC organization, Family and Children First Council, and we're on the committee with David Merriman trying to figure out how to solve this problem, armament of students, children that need a place to live and help because they're in trouble. So we're pretty involved with lots of the stuff that you're involved with. Equity is an important issue, and the politicization, the politics of the country and the state right now have made it even more difficult. So I think this is a very timely topic for us to be talking to you all about. My colleague Jennifer Dodd, Dr. Dodd, is going to go through a slide. I guess we don't have these slides, but that's okay. We've got hard copies we can give you.
We're putting the slides up for you.
Oh, okay. We've got a lot of stuff here to talk about. We'll try to get through it quickly, but we want you to know that whatever you need today or in the future, call us. We want to be helpful and provide service to all of you as we provide services to children across the county. So Jen, you're on.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having us. I wanted to sort of set the stage to talk about what equity work in school districts is, because it's a word that a lot of people use, and these days especially a lot of people misunderstand. And so on the next slide, you'll see when we talk about subgroups. And so one of the things where you may be talking about when we were doing the vaccine clinics, when you're talking about disparities, you're talking about equity, a lot of times you're comparing the percentage of vaccine rates from one racial group to another racial group. In the schools, we look at disproportionality. And so I'm going to kind of walk you through that a little bit, and you may understand this, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So when we talk about equity, we talk about disproportionality, we talk about it within subgroups. And there are so many subgroups in a school. So students with and without disabilities, gifted students and versus non-gifted students, males and females, economically disadvantaged versus non-economically disadvantaged students, English language learners, non-English language learners, racial minorities versus racial majority. And there are others, but these are the primary ones. And then on the next slide, you can see the places, some of the places of where we look at these disproportionalities. So things we look at are like attendance or discipline, achievement, participation, for example, in early childhood programs, special education identification, gifted identification, course placement, graduation, post-secondary enrollment. So what we look at with the disproportionality is we look to see if any subgroup is underrepresented or overrepresented in these areas based on the proportion of their population within the actual school or within the district. And so let me give you some examples to think through. So one example of things we may find when we do equity audits, this is all data-driven based, because we know we all have experiences and we have assumptions as to how things are or aren't going for a particular group, but we don't want to drive our work based on our assumptions. So this is all data-driven. And so one example is 75% of special education students are male, while males only make up 50% of the student population. So this would mean that there is a higher representation of males in special education. So, and then I'm on slide 4, I think you're trying to catch up. So another example is 25% of students who receive gifted education students are economically disadvantaged. However, economically disadvantaged students make up 75% of the entire student population. So this means there's a lower representation of economically disadvantaged students identified as gifted and receiving gifted services. Just a couple more examples to get these in your mind. On the next slide, 40% of students with one or more disciplinary actions are students receiving special education services. However, students receiving special ed services only make up 50% of the student population. So there's a higher proportion or higher percentage of special education students receiving disciplinary actions. Another example is 30% of students in a district's early childhood program are African American, yet 80% of the entire student population is African American. This would mean that there's a lower representation of African American students participating in the early childhood program. And just as one more example on the next slide, 5% of students in honors courses are receiving special education, while students with disabilities make up 12% of the student population. So now we have a lower representation of students with disabilities taking honors courses. And so when we find these findings through equity audits, it doesn't mean that there's anything that's wrong with what's doing, but it's sort of the trigger to stop and look and start investigating the root causes. So why are these things happening? What are the barriers? What are our programs or our policies or our unintentional practices? And how are those impeding some of the equity pieces? So on the next couple of slides, some of the questions that in a district we may ask ourselves, well, I want to make a key point. So it's very important to understand that equity doesn't take anything away from anybody else. So I think somewhere we talked about fair share. So this isn't making sure that everybody gets a little piece of the pie. This means everybody gets everything that they need in order to access what they need and have the opportunities they need and have the outcomes they need. So on the next slide, I want to talk just some posing questions about root causes as we go through these equity audits. So if we find that there's an underrepresentation of any subgroup, but in our example it was African American children in early childhood programs, the questions we might ask ourselves are parents aware of the importance of early childhood? Do they understand how to access the district's program? Are there factors of the program? So for example, is it only a half-day program but you don't provide transportation? That limits which families have the ability to make use of that program? Does the district market the program only in certain locations that limit which families see the information? Or is the program information primarily online where only families with internet access can view the information? So none of these things are bad, but if you're doing these things, you're unintentionally creating some systemic barriers. So on the next slide, there's another example of some root causes when we look at overrepresentation of disciplinary action. Are there certain teachers who send students to the principal's office more than they do others? And does it differ by race or gender, age, students with disabilities? Are teachers trained appropriately on developmentally appropriate expectations for boys and girls? Do all teachers have the support in meeting the needs of students with disabilities in the classrooms, or when they struggle, do they automatically do a disciplinary referral? And then are there school policies such as zero tolerance that don't allow teachers or administrators to take individual factors into consideration, or almost more of as restorative practices? Just a couple other examples of root causes. When we talk about underrepresentation in high-level courses, do school policies for promotion and placement create barriers for students to attempt high-level courses in which they may otherwise be successful? So on the next slide, you'll see why can't special education students take honors courses? Have we looked at that, or do we just use their grades in prior courses as sort of a barrier? In that sense, what supports are provided to students with special needs to be successful in any and all courses? Do teachers believe that only high-achieving students should be allowed in their high-level courses? Do teachers have the resources to differentiate instruction in high-level courses, or do they feel they can only teach to those that are already high-performing? And do parents know how to navigate the school system to advocate for all these options for their students? And then I'll just give you one more example when we talk about overrepresentation in special education on the next slide. Are teachers trained to meet the academic and behavioral needs of all students? Or, again, once they're struggling, does it trigger a referral to special education? Do schools have a system of tiered supports where students can receive additional support before they're even identified? We shouldn't use the identification as the trigger for the services. Those should happen first. Do teachers' expectations reflect developmentally appropriate behaviors for the age and genders of their students? Or are they just assuming that they're misbehaving? And how are families engaged in supporting additional needs of their students? So these obviously are not exhaustive, but these are sort of the thought processes that a district equity task force would go through after doing an audit. And then they would start to dig deeper to look at their policies. So Do you have to have only an A and B in all of your classes before you can take an AP class? Or what are the trainings and expectations of teachers? Are they sending more special education students to the office because they're not able to manage the behaviors? And so on the next slide, when we talk about that, especially when we're talking about teachers or others' interactions with the students, we talk about implicit bias. And we know, I know everybody in this group understands the fact that we all have implicit biases. There's no way around it. They're not bad, they're not intentional, but they're based on the experiences we have and the assumptions we make about any particular group of people. And so some of the things that you, as an example, when we talk about implicit bias, girls are emotional, boys are overactive, older people can't do technology, younger people can't get off the technology, students with disabilities can't learn complicated concepts, students who are economically disadvantaged have disengaged parents, students from divorced households have troubled home lives, Asian Americans are really studious and smart, people speaking broken English are stupid, overweight people are lazy. So some of those things are hurtful, some of those things are not, but they all drive how somebody interacts with any subgroup population. And so just on the next slide, one of the things that schools do is training, and training both teachers and students in diversity, equity, and implicit bias to treat everybody, to recognize your own implicit biases, treat everybody as an individual, not to treat them as any subgroup. And that is actually really important because this is counter to where you hear critics talking about equity work in a district. You've heard about the critical race theory. Equity work in a school district is the opposite of teaching any one subgroup, and in this instance, white people, to feel guilty about one thing or another, to feel bad. Actual implicit bias training, as you all know, is the opposite of that. It's how to treat literally everybody as an individual. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob on the next slide to talk a little bit about what we do at the ESC with some training.
So one of our key functions is professional development, and in that professional development, we reach a lot of educators. School systems come to us to put together complicated professional development that they cannot do themselves. They're either too small or don't have the ability to do it, so we put it on. And as you see there by that first slide, over 100 trainings in the past 5 years that we've reached 6,200 educators. And that includes the topics of implicit or unconscious bias, social justice, restorative practices, cultural sensitivity and cultural competency, diversity, equity, and inclusive practices, and disrupting poverty. These are all titles, but also broad categories of professional development that we've done. And before, 3 years ago, we would do these, and hey, it was great. People were coming to them, and they still do. But the politics of today, the politics at our national level, our state level now, and our local level has been really difficult. The word equity has become a bad word. People think that we're doing something wrong when we do equity. We're being accused, as educators, of indoctrinating children. And Jen mentioned it, the whole thing where white kids should feel bad about slavery, or that white privilege is something that is now something to be shunned. So we're getting a lot of pressure on the local, state, and national level. Of course, it really began in the national level. I don't have to tell anybody what's going on right now, but it's my fear is that districts are going to be more careful about doing equity kinds of audits and equity professional development. We haven't seen it yet, and I think we're kind of a buffer. The districts can send their staffs to us, and they do still. But I'm really worried about it, and I'm worried about the politics of what's been happening. This critical race theory, you've all heard about it. It doesn't exist. It is not a problem in public schools. It's not even a bad thing. So college prep kids really should be hearing about it and learning about it. But it's become a mantra for a lot of organizations to say public schools shouldn't be doing these things. And
I'm going to ask you to pause on this for a moment and then speed through the rest of the slides. But we're going to take a few questions because we have opposed certain legislation at the State House, House Bills 322 and 327, We are on record in a written way. I just want to ask, and maybe there are others, but again, I'm going to ask that we get through this part of the conversation because it's so important. Where's the, if any, validity to these concerns? Or is it driven by what we know to be a racial component? Some of these answers are self-evident, right? But you have a role to play with these districts. So just tell us where there might be some validity to any of these thoughts or concerns that are raised, whether it be around CRT or the instruction around equity in our school systems.
Honestly, Chairman, I don't think there is any validity. I've talked to so many superintendents and say, hey, this just doesn't exist. We've never done these things. Critical race theory is the easiest one to talk about. Superintendents are astonished that it's become an issue. And I will say that it is generally in the white suburban districts where it's become a problem. The inner ring cities, districts, we're not hearing it as complaints. I've not done the research on that, but Jen and I, in talking about it, we have not heard concerns from superintendents about these issues in the inner ring suburban districts around Cuyahoga County. So, as I have told numerous people, this just is not a real concern. It's kind of a made-up conspiracy theory kind of thing that we're dealing with.
Well, and I think, and I'll just add too, so there's 322 and 327, although those are probably going to go to the wayside because nobody could come together on them. So the one we're watching now is House Bill 616. That one's going to start getting traction. It's out there, it's been introduced, and I think referred to a committee. And you all know that everybody's quiet right now until after the election, then they're going to speed things through in the last month. So when Bob was talking about the critical race theory in of itself, it's not appropriate for K-12 because it's so high level, but it's not bad. But critical race theory or social emotional learning now is the new word that's getting twisted in equity. The definitions that people are applying to these things are wrong, they're untrue, and so when you try to counter what somebody is claiming is happening in the schools, one, you're trying to counter that, no, that's not happening, and no, that's not the right definition. But one of the other tricky parts about especially House Bill 616, and you saw it a little in the others, is just they list specific things, but then they have the broad divisive concepts topic. Well, anybody could decide, any parent could decide that this is a divisive topic, and in House Bill 616, they can file a complaint for it, and the school could lose funding, the teacher could lose their license, because now we're at the point of, it's always been local control about what's taught in a school district. Parents have always had the ability to go and ask what's being taught in a school district, but now from the top down, we're literally controlling based on erroneous information, based on emotions, based on politics. And so if 616 were to pass, not only is it a threat because we don't even know all of the things that somebody could consider under divisive topics, but now we're talking about teacher licensure and we're talking about school funding too.
Oh, that's important. 616 is new news to some of us, so thank you for that. Yes, Dr. Modlin.
So I actually have heard of accounts nationally and even locally, Shaker Heights being one. When you're talking about gifted education, advanced placement, honors courses, it's easier to throw the baby out with the bathwater instead of, doing the work that is necessary to achieve equity and opportunities. You haven't heard of any situations locally in certain school districts where they're eliminating or discussing eliminating advanced placement and honors? Because I have actually.
I haven't not because of equity. Now some have decided to do it because, for example, when College Prep Plus came along, you had many more students enrolling that than an AP. So there may be other reasons. All of our first ring school districts a couple of years ago we got funding and they went through an equity audit. Where they've all landed in their policies and practices that they've changed, I don't know. I haven't talked to them in depth about it, but if those changes are happening, I would want to better understand what's the decision behind those two.
Because it's easier to do away with it than to deal with a situation or why the inequities occur, in terms of access to these honors.
Yeah, but I don't, and now I'm just kind of speaking off the cuff here. Especially at a district like Shaker Heights, you would have a lot of community pushback, I think, if you got rid of the AP placement.
Yeah.
So if they weren't going to address the equity, they just wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't take the practices to really open access to other students rather than getting rid of it. So I'm not sure the reasons behind them getting rid of it, but Mayor Blackwell?
I'm actually, City Make Place actually been a factor of your
Mm-hmm.
organization, mayors and superintendent. So I actually attend your center with my superintendent, and it has changed children that are in addition to your students of promise that you were. We have a 97% graduation rate. People don't know that about Maple Heights, a 97% graduation rate, and kids are graduating on time because the students are promised. But this organization, and whoever the elected officials, because politics are a part of it, we have to get involved. And we have to fight for our children along with these educators. So I'm going to give a shout out. It's been an amazing experience. We don't even know that we are part of the education process. You take your oath off, you think you're supposed to balance the budget and hire police, but we also are part of the education process. So your center, which is right in Independence on Rockside Road, really helps the superintendent and I put our heads together because it's an economic development initiative, it is a quality of life initiative, it is addressing youth violence, it is addressing all the things that you always so eloquently say. I just like hang on to the words that you say. But it really is, and it's important for us to be a part of this. And then I have the benefit of being on this committee, which further helps me in that leadership role. But everything that you brought out are things that we need to understand when we're working on curriculum. And let's face it, the portion of property tax dollars don't come to cities; they go to schools. Now, whether that's constitutional or not, it's a whole other issue. And so this is the return on the investment. And so parents and affluent suburban communities understand that. And that's how this House bill emerged, because they know that their tax dollars drive all of this, and they demand what they want to present in the curriculum and what they don't want. And so this is an important, I'm so glad they're here today for us to all understand that as a group in this case, and thank you for bringing them. But we are a benefactor, and for us in a ring suburb, it's been huge. And because we have predominantly white educators, and one thing we're not talking about, the importance of bringing more people that look like the children to be the educators. I mean, it's a great deal of influence that these men especially have in some of these academies. And as we compete with charter schools, and they're being gravitated to where people feel like that there's an understanding and acceptance, and this bias is addressed. So being here, but I want to speak as a mayor of the first rings, mayors and superintendents. We do this together. We really been.
Well, thank you for saying that, and the conversations have been wonderful, and I know the superintendents have appreciated having that forum that we put together with all the mayors, so we appreciate you having you there.
Because we want to say yes in the suburbs. I'm just going to say
I know.
Right.
We'll work on it.
I don't think people realize a lot of the people in our suburbs are from the central city. They're from the central city, but yet they don't have the benefits of central city.
Right.
And so
Well, and that's one of the rings for bringing, for the background for you guys, is 16 school districts surrounding Cleveland that they're small, right? So they don't have the resource and the capacity that CMSD may, and so trying to do things collectively, a little collective impact.
So let's hold the last few questions, because we're going to get to them, but please, I know I've asked you to speed through it.
That's okay.
Not at record pace, but if there are themes that you want to leave us with,
that's okay.
please do so.
So the last thing I wanted to talk about was the number of, so superintendents work for board members, and a board member just has to be 18, live in the community, and run for election, and they can be the board member. And generally, things go pretty well. Superintendents know how to manage and work with the boards, but lately, boards of education have taken a turn, honestly, from what I'm seeing, not everywhere, but in a number of places, and superintendents have left as a result, and they're running for the wrong reasons. They're running under these pumped up political things that are going on, critical race theory, you're doing things to my child you shouldn't be doing, and of course, none of it's true. What was an interesting stat here was on slide Board of Education elections. You'll see that in 2017, there were 97 candidates for 80 vacancies. So that's pretty simple to understand, and yet in 2021, there were 107 candidates for 65 vacancies. So that in itself, that stat doesn't mean too much, but it's a high number of people running for a few seats. And then just two things that occurred recently. superintendents who I know. One superintendent in the county had a police escort going home after a board meeting because things got so dangerous and people screaming and yelling about stuff like critical race theory and some of the other things that aren't really happening, but people have listened to the news and social media and think things are going badly. So that's a superintendent who is afraid to go home by herself because of a board meeting. Now, I've been through difficult board meetings, but I never felt like I needed a police escort to get home. That's a recent kind of a development. And then this is another example. A superintendent had 4 new board members. One didn't run at the last minute, and there were 4 openings out of 5 seats. He called all of them after the election to congratulate them. None of them returned his call because they ran because they wanted to get rid of him, literally. And he found another job, actually, before the turn of the calendar year. Those are 2 examples of things that are going on with superintendents that are pretty difficult. So in response to the question, well, are you changing what you're doing? I would say no, they're all standing up to what's right about equity and analyzing data, but it's getting more and more difficult, and I worry that unless things turn around, and I do think they will, but unless things turn around, it is going to be really difficult for school superintendents, principals, and even board members to hang in there in the face of the controversy and the things that are going on in our national level. Let me just say one more thing. National politics has created what's going on from my point of view, and I pay great attention to this. Managing that, I think, is going to get better. I think I think things are improving at the local level, but it takes a really strong person to do that, strong educators, and it's even true at the teacher level. There are teachers that don't want to teach anymore. They feel like our legislators, state legislators with House Bill 616, is that it, Tim?
That's the news.
Has some real complications to it that are scaring people. And if you can get out and do something else, they are. And I think we have a slide. Ken,
Well,
go.
yeah, so for time's sake, and I know you all have the handouts too, so, and you have a huge agenda still to get through. So in the rest of the slides, there's a little bit more about House Bill 616. And I can send Habiba or Latia the actual summary of it if you guys wanted, so you had it. But also in there's a couple of slides on what, the pandemic only exacerbated and heightened the inequities in schools, right? And so one of the things we're starting to watch, Ohio State University has done a learning loss study. And so I will say that certainly there is a lot of learning loss, and it's different depending on what demographics you look at. There is some hope, though. What they did last fall, it was like one long year with COVID, right? But the most recent report shows improvements from the report prior with the learning loss. So we're making some gains. And then the last 3 slides in your handout just talk a little bit about the workforce shortages. That's not new to anybody, but it's all across all areas, classified, transportation drivers, for example, certified with the teachers, and administrative. And so you take all of these things, put them together, right? It's schools were always a challenging but wonderful place to be, but they're becoming more and more challenging right now. And we don't want to lose really good educators because
Thank you
of
for the summary on the learning loss and the shortages where of course, everybody deals with
right?
the same things. Regarding 616, you've told us what it is.
Yep.
It'd be interesting when you respond to Habiba. Tell us, I know you can't necessarily editorialize, or maybe you can, but because we will respond to this as we have time has passed. We know we have a short cycle to do so, maybe in the month.
Yeah.
But if there's any leaning you have around this, make sure that's expressed as well. And if you don't want us to have attribution, we won't, but we'd like to be smarter from your perspective why 616 is bad thinking, if you believe it's bad thinking.
Well, I do. And so forever, maybe a really long time, but, the Ohio Revised Code gave all the local control to the school boards of education for all the instructional materials. And like I said, parents always had access. Well, so 616 it'll ring similar to 322 and 327, but it's a little different. So now they actually specify some of the things to not include. So it specifies that divisive or inherently racist concepts include critical race theory, intersectional theory, the 1619 Project, diversity, equity, and inclusion learning outcomes, inherited racial guilt, and any other concept that the State Board of Education defines as divisive or inherently racist. Now, I think the 1619 Project would be helpful in schools. I think critical race theory would be helpful in schools. But if the bill is going to be such that it's going to continue moving forward, then if we can at least change things in it, well, at least be specific. So say 1619, maybe say critical race theory. But to just say diversity, equity, and inclusion learning outcomes, I don't know what anybody means by that. And any other concept.
Or why that is bad.
Right, that too. Okay. Or any other concept that the State Board of Education defines as divisive or inherently racist.
So divisive, once again, definitions matter, right? Divisive to whom? Okay.
So, yeah, it's not good. It's as bad as 322, 327. What might make it worse, one, are these potential outcomes, but also if 322 and 327 were too far out there that they couldn't get traction, then that was good. And we actually strategized with our advocacy experts to not say too much once it went quiet for a little while because we didn't want to bring the uproar back. I think those are done. 616, if it gets traction, that'll be worse than the others. If it doesn't get traction and pass by the end of the year, though, I'm quite certain in the new General Assembly we'll reintroduce something else that we have to pay attention to around this.
Thank you. Other questions? Barbara, Jennifer.
If I may make a comment, first, thank you.
You're very
Thank you
welcome.
for your leadership. Thank you for your support to educators, including folks in my organization. With regard to 616, there was an element of this that involved constraining what educators could do in support of LGBTQ plus youth. And so I'm wondering, is that language still in the bill?
I have to go back and look.
I think it deepens the tragedy, quite frankly, of these pieces of legislation to prevent divisive concepts from being taught because it deepens the harm to even a broader swath of marginalized youth. And then when you layer in intersections around gender identity or sexual orientation and race, now you're really even deepening that harm further. So I'm curious about that, and then just want this body to be aware that that is an element of this legislation that could prove even more harmful.
Yeah, I'll look.
Yes, Marcia.
And there's one other thing that I'd like to call out that's really concerning. Most of the other bills have tended to have a lot of effect on teaching, which we get. This is education. But this bill talks about being a censorship bill and one that actually restricts how these things are acknowledged, taught, and discussed in schools. It's really going deep and wide in terms of its influence and its impacts. I think we have to really pay attention.
The fear peddling is, you said brighter days ahead. We hope that's true, but it seems that the steam continues
for a while
the
at
subject.
Let me just leave one last thing before we go. We had a roundtable the other day of superintendents in the county and outside the county as well. I asked them all what was their most challenging thing that they're facing. And they all had different things. There were like 40 superintendents there. The most encouraging thing for me was every one of them said they had a great start of the new school year. And that's because they're dealing with students and kids. We get the parents and the adults out of the way, schools are doing really well. And I was proud of them for feeling so good about the start of the school year. And they were being honest. They had a great start. So I think we're going to get back to where we're supposed to be as long as we keep our heads straight, and stay strong on the way we should educate children. We'll be fine.
Thank you both. Well done. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
It was great information.
And thank you for your work. The resolutions you've done about legislation has really been helpful. We've read them this today, and 616 will be an important one as well.
We'll get to it.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question
Yeah.
really quickly about 616, if you know the answer? It was introduced, I'm assuming, and it's pending right now in the House. Has it been referred to committee or no?
think it was referred to committee, but I have to go back and look at the status when I get back, and I'll send you stuff. It'll be.
So I think just because I've reported out on this before in the past and now putting on my lawyer hat, I think what we're gonna have to watch if we decide to take on 616 is what the two doctors spoke about a little bit, is that it will probably likely not pass this year because the legislature's on recess until November. I think they have a couple of meetings scheduled. And with bills, if you guys, speaking of education, how a bill gets to the Hill or the songs or whatever, it has to pass both the House, it goes to committee in the House, it has to be voted out of committee, it has to pass the House, and then it has to go to the Senate and do the same thing and then go in. I just don't think, and what I'm learning from my lobbyists in my day job with the Clerks Association, is that there may not just be enough time for that to happen, but will likely happen is what they both spoke about, is it will be reintroduced by another legislator at the beginning of the next year.
And I do think that's the most likely path, but what we will always worry about in the December, right before new General Assembly.
Is it getting slid into a bill that's already passed?
Is it slid in something else,
Yeah.
a Christmas tree bill, so
That's what you have to
watch.
watch, that it's not slid in as an amendment to another larger piece of legislation that would go in 100%.
Right?
Great, thank you.
Okay,
Thank
you're very
both.
welcome. Thank you guys for having us.
Okay, so very quickly, I talked about the CACE funding. We have the approval to have $500,000 in funding for the work of the CACE. That'll be, we'll talk about it as a group. Some of the ideas that come to mind, of course, around the communications that we will put out to the community, how we gather folks to talk about work with the CACE. Remember when we first got started, we had the community conversations. Those came with some expense, but how do we make it more welcoming to the youth? How do we make it welcoming to seniors? How do we make it well to those who are affected by some of the things that we're talking about in our subcommittees, whether it's criminal justice system, what have you. So no decisions today. What we're going to do to start is have the subcommittee chairs talk, and anyone else who'd like to join those conversations when we set them up to strategize around the how and the what and the why and a process for deploying those funds. It's not the kind of money that we can spend wild and free with. It will exhaust itself pretty quickly, but we have an opportunity to make a difference with those funds over the next year. So I just wanted you to hear that and know that there will be more to come. The other thing is, county executive has suggested that we consider a forum, right, where we invite the community in, have a facilitator who is someone, will make, these are my words at this point, someone of color to facilitate this conversation. And who are we trying to engage in these discussions?
I think it would to be engaging of the community. So similar, for those of you who were on the case, is what we did with Common Ground, but sort of have a discussion about how we were birthed, where we are now, what we see as the future, what we've done, and really make a way so that we can hear from folks in the community so we don't lose sight of our charge and the enabling legislation and what they would like us to think about and do.
So everyone will have some input, provide your thinking on the how and the best uses, right? Because we should get optimal benefit and outcomes from these funds. Again, they won't spread very far, but let's make good use of them as effectively as possible. All right. Any questions on that subject? All right. Now let's, we don't have interim chief marshal here, right? So let's go to Director Lockett.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'll be pretty brief, just give you an overview of what the Department of Equity and Inclusion have been up to since our last meeting. The GARE survey closed on July 22nd. We did receive more than 40% responses from employees, so that was a large enough sample size. We expect the report from GARE to be presented as a draft late September, early October, and then finalized within 30 days after that. We're currently in the midst of the contract for diversity, equity, and inclusion training for Tri-C. We're in the midst of the all-staff town hall trainings. We're completing the 7 sessions of Town Hall 1 this week. There will be 2 more town halls. Town Hall 1 focused on the case for DEI at Cuyahoga County. Town Hall 2 is about self-awareness, increasing self-awareness. We'll do 7 classes of Town Hall 2. And then it'll be followed by 7 classes of Town Hall 3, which is the improving emotional IQ and inclusivity. So that's where we are with the training. The last date for the Town Hall 3 should be finished by the third week in November, right before Thanksgiving. And so we've been proceeding with that project. The managers and supervisors completed their training in late May and June was the first class, and their second class was in July. So the managers, more than 700 managers, completed their training. Was offered training, completed the training in that time period. And the last thing I would mention is that internally, Department of Equity and Inclusion have provided internal webinars on some of our tools. The equity zone map and policy, where you give additional consideration to areas, the equity zone that have been designated as areas that have a need for, that have experienced disinvestment. And the 2 webinars are provided on the diversity, equity, and inclusion scorecard, which is where we just a tool to look at the 3 different areas: supplier diversity, workforce diversity and equity, and policies and programs, how departments can, what tools and actions they could be doing in each of those 3 areas to advance equity. And finally, the equity assessment tool, which is a systematic review of how a department can use that tool to look at their policies, programs, and procedures. Kind of similar to the questions that they discussed, the Educational Services Center on the, when they look at the different overrepresentation or underrepresentation, what are some of the things that you can evaluate, questions you can ask to try to figure out what you can tweak or change about your program so that you can reduce the disparity in either way, a burden or under benefit for your programs, policies, and procedures.
Director Locke, thank you. One of the questions I have is related to equity zones. Is there a way, and I don't know how long the departments have been using this model, in the next, few months, to have like some sort of like case study or case studies of, this is an example of an award we gave under this model, and we probably wouldn't have done this previously, but because of this model, this is how we deployed or made this decision. Because I'm just curious just how it looks, right? Once it goes through the process, you make that decision and it actually works.
So, yes, the map was approved in February. Departments did start proactively using it. We have 3 different areas where they've used it. It was used for and I can provide a summary. We don't have where this project would not have been approved last year, but we do have the scoring that shows that, for instance, with the tree canopy program, this category, equity zones, were given this amount of points, and then based on that, how many were awarded, and you can see based on the dollar amount that was awarded, what number of applications were awarded in equity zones, which ones were not, which projects were awarded that were not in equity zones. Similarly, for the Public Works, used it for their 50/50 local funded project, and we have a data on what projects out of the dollar amounts that were awarded, what dollar amount was within equity zones, and which dollar amounts were not. And similarly with the CDBG municipal program. Now, we don't know, for instance, I see Mayor Blackwell mentioning if the city would not have submitted without that scoring. But it does show that what projects received those points and what percentage of them were in the awarding zone based on that criteria.
So that explanation, along with others, is why I joined members Cavanis and Grimes in celebrating and also saying great work. It's been a short period of time, but great work being accomplished on your part. This next comment is a reflection on you, but I bring it up now because it's sort of in the procurement realm, and it's firsthand and personal, so no need to comment. But there was a procurement opportunity recently where the county was hiring a risk manager. You've had a risk manager in place for years, and that risk management firm had a minority component to it as a sub, and they perhaps were doing great work, but outside of procurement, this may have been legal involved, hired a firm that has no employees in Cuyahoga County, no office in Cuyahoga County, and the closest person, because I and this is not sour grapes, we can't win them all, but the person who asked me to entertain a partnership with them was out of Florida, and the closest office to Cuyahoga County was in Pittsburgh. These are the examples, right, that we can't have happen, especially for something so important to the county. And what it suggests, right? Hire the best, clearly, but if we're saying we can't find best or close to best right here in our own neighborhood, that's a problem for me. And while, again, I have firsthand information, and it's not sort of being upset because your team didn't win, some things are right, some things aren't right. And that's the way I look at it. So work to do, and that's why your involvement should continue, and it should go deeper, and it should make sure that lens you talked about is applied to all these sorts of things, because it matters. It has to matter. Okay. All right. That's the soapbox for me. I don't think we need to talk, anything else? Director? All right. We don't need to talk about 322, 327. We have the congressional districts and redistricting we're fine with right now. Dr. Hoffman, anything you want to offer?
I just wanted to give a quick update. I've been sharing a version of this interface, which is included. If you do the QR code, you can see the interactions I shared with the subcommittee on communications, Dr. Lockett, and Policy Bridge. And so this is just a tool for visualizing regional equity, where it's this is looking at the health equity index from Helping Neo. Depending on which scenario you click, status quo, nothing changes. Equality, the resources are allocated but distributed equally. You don't. That's the result you see there. You don't see. You see things improving, but you still see the same persistent regional distributions of inequity. And then an equity approach where you're actually allocating resources based on need, similar to actually what many folks have actually already been discussing. And in that scenario, if you run it, you actually see regional equity being achieved within the context of this 10-year period. So this is just a way of visualizing it that helps people see what policies, what kind of policies would have an impact over time. And next step is to begin to sort of look at some of the specific policies being considered, building on the work of the last several years from the systems mapping. So
the interpretation is if policies that have been talked about and discussed are enacted, the pursuit towards equity becomes something that is attainable, real, and makes a big difference. Is that
yes,
right?
and then specifically with a focus on equity, as opposed to thinking about just equally distributing resources.
Equity itself, the fairness component, right?
The goal is to help folks think a little bit more about this from a systems perspective, which I think was the original goal, and help people appreciate the importance of focusing on equity, not just equality.
Oh, that's a big deal. Right. Any questions? I think time to digest it. Any questions now, or certainly we can bring Dr. Hoffman back in to talk about this further. The simulation is an important one. As always, thank you for the behind-the-scenes work, because that keeps us centered on why we're doing this. Yes, the levers associated with it.
That last slide just speaks to what you just said, because there's equity zone, we got the tree canopy, we got the public works, so it looks like what you just presented was just a confirmation of what Director just said. That was the culmination of how that's actually in play.
Correct.
Is that correct? Is that a?
That's correct.
Okay.
I just have one question. How can we get a hold of you?
Email.
Is your email on
No,
the
it's not
website?
on here, actually. PSH39@CACE.edu. PSH39@CACE.
It sounds like you got a call coming. Good. All right.
Was this information for what you just shared going to the public? This kind of data that the secretary
Whatever we decide, the answer is
I
absolutely.
wasn't here before, so.
Yeah, whatever we decide.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. Okay.
I'm sorry, you said the email is at CACE.edu? I will have Latia send out Dr. Hoffman's email address, and she'll probably be doing it right now, since she's listening, so we can all have it. Your contact information.
Member Grimes is helping with the community survey, so that work is ongoing. Thank you, Clerk Bird. And with regard to chair reports, anything beyond what we've talked about?
I want to thank Dr. Hoffman, but on behalf of the Communications Subcommittee, because he has been bringing his, the iterations of the systems mapping work and envisioning with our subcommittee how we might bring this work to the community so that the community can kind of gain a grasp for how systems change can impact their immediate conditions. So thank you for that. We are going to be reviewing 4 responses to the RFP that was put out in service to getting the community survey activated. And so that's kind of our focus right now, is getting a response to the applicants who put in proposals.
Dr. Altman, long overdue and well-deserved praise, right? It's coming. There were people who just didn't understand it to begin with, myself included. Now it's starting to crystallize, so thank you. Anything?
Yeah, so the only thing that I'll share is that that Economic Opportunity Subcommittee continues to meet with the Guardians. I would say there's sort of 3 areas that we've looked at. Obviously, the renovations of the stadium is the biggest and, publicly known. We're also talking to them about just internally, how do they connect with different networks? How do they evaluate other contracts they have that are sort of ongoing operating needs that they have that they outsource, right? They also, have looked at, their wages and like how are those equitable. They have a contract actually with a concession stand vendor that they've had for maybe decades, right? Even before the Dolans took over the team. So, they're actually evaluating that and seeing, how does that align with sort of their shifting values, right? That are more grounded in equity. And I'm interested to see the outcome of that process. So, I say that, just strong partnership with them right now, and looking forward to seeing them, make some adjustments on their end.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and your committee, and thank Neil Weiss, quite honestly, within the Guardians, who's been a champion for this stuff, a number of different circles from the beginning. So kudos to the Guardians and to you and others for keeping this work going. And again, more to come, because there's more development. This model is we've had versions, but this one seems to be working as well as anything that we've seen. Although we know the project is some time away, why not get started now? Gear, anything?
I'll just send it via email.
It's a running joke.
I will send it via email to you all. We'll get that out this week.
Okay, thank you.
Not to hold.
The next meeting, we have a date scheduled?
We do. We don't have a time scheduled, but we have the date. If you could hold your calendars, please. It's going to be October 27th. Just need to, Maccabi doesn't like that date.
The Women of Color Foundation.
Oh, I'm
20th.
speaking, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll all show up, crash the party.
Come on, I got tickets.
All right.
Okay, so we will, with the chair's permission, we'll figure something else out. We just gotta get it.
Yes, Dr. Madla.
Yeah, this is my first meeting, so I'm going to apologize for this statement, but I have to speak up and say something. I was actually very disturbed and perturbed at the last comment that Dr. Robert Menjerink made. He made a statement that and I know this is a public meeting, so I have to say this to make sure that the public understands that this CACE commission doesn't necessarily agree with what he said. He said that the schools would be better off if the parents would get out of the way. And I think we all agree that students are better off when there are active parents involved in the education of their
Yeah, oh, no, I thought there was context to it, but.
That was quite offensive to me.
No, I get it. I'm not gonna defend him.
I just want to be on record.
I thought there was a different context, but
Yeah.
the statement on its own is offensive,
Right.
Because we know but I think there was somewhere else in the slides you talked about the parental involvement and how important it is, but I hear you, so let me.
Yeah, I mean,
Context.
I think unfortunately, there are some parents who kind of fuel the fire of
There are some, right, yes.
But as a parent, I am very much involved.
Right, exactly.
So, I recognize the value that parents bring.
But he said that
It
as,
was a blanket,
yeah,
it was a blanket
right.
kind of a
Yeah,
statement.
I agree. But there are definitely some parents that fuel all of the other stuff as well.
I'll say it. I mean, how I feel. The reality, I feel like the South is rising again. This is what we're looking at.
Absolutely.
And those who have a spirit of the North and those who have a spirit of the South. And we have to, the solution is we have to resist. Like, talk about it in church. How you fight the devil. You resist him and you speak the word of God. You just have to resist these things and speak the truth. Because what they're saying, and maybe there are some parents, certainly no way, not all. We need our parents in the lives of all our children. But there are some who are operating in that way. And this critical race theory is the new boogeyman. It was Black Lives Matter, and then American Awakening. That's a beautiful thing. American awoke, and now Black Lives Matter does not have that cloud over it that it had before. But without that cloud, without the ability to say all lives matter or blue lives matter, the new thing is critical race theory. And as he said factually, it's not a real thing. It's not, but it's the new boogeyman. And we have to resist it and speak the truth. Draw a Mason-Dixon line in the sand and resist it.
There's going to continue to be some other iteration of the same thing, you know, next year to be something else.
Don't rationalize it. Don't try to figure it out. Reject it.
There's a way who says he's on the school board.
Yes. All right.
He's on the school board. I think what you left it hanging was difficult, but
yeah,
it is difficult if the parents aren't coming up with the purpose of assisting, respecting, and being involved in the process. So I'm on a different side of that because he comes home.
That's the context I
you know, as a school board member, with some things that are very difficult for him to really serve in that role, which is why he ran and eventually went. So.
But we'll get some clarification.
Yeah.
If you're okay with that.
The hair stood on the back of my neck.
Well, thank you, Council President. Appreciate your time and attention today. Thank you as well to our guests. Thank you. Anything else before we close this discussion? Thank you, newbie, Dr. Modlin. All right. We're good? All right. Thank you all. Appreciate your time.